And we started making names right away. And I loved it. I was robbing drug dealers, and taking their gold right off their neck. And the shit we did, who's going to call the police on you? A drug dealer?
I can identify with anything that was normal, to be honest with you. But I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Yeah.
99% of the time, you're going to disappear.
Just like the Donnie Brasco situation with Lefty?
Yeah, because the reason why, they figure it this way. You brought this guy around, he ratted on everybody, now he ratted on you. You might turn around and join him and rat on us, so we get rid of you. There's no connection between there and there, and they get rid of you.
Welcome to another episode of Chattin with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Gary Jenkins. What's up, man?
Hey, Bill. What's up?
How you doing?
Good.
So last time you were here, we talked about your law enforcement career.
Yes.
And I want to talk today about the organized crime aspect of it. Yeah, like when did that come into play with your career?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I think I saw a report one time from somebody and they said they were going to tell intelligence about it. And I was like a young street policeman. I thought, intelligence? Who's that? So I started asking around. Couldn't find anybody that knew anything about them or knew anybody that worked down there.
Yeah.
So, and I did find out there was some super secret kind of a unit that had an off-site that was not, you never saw them in police headquarters or you never saw them anywhere. So I researched and found out who the sergeants were and who was down there. And then made a call and had some kind of little tidbit of information and got to know one of the sergeants. Went down there one day and talked to him, asked his advice about something I was working on. And he kind of smiled and he knew what I was doing. But I was starting my politicking early because I wanted to go there. That's where I wanted to go. I was a detective, a burglary detective at the time. But I wanted to go there because I knew they worked on the big boys. And made, they'd really make cases. We'll get into that in a little bit, but they worked on the big boys and they had a lot of freedom and they got to have what we call slick cars. That means that they were like mainly old used rental cars is what we bought. Although when I first came in, we had 3 cars for 6 guys and 2 sergeants. So it was, and the sergeants drove the cars home, back and forth to work and home. And if you had 2 guys working, we'd have 2 guys working nights, and they'd go get one of the sergeants, drive over to the sergeant's house and get his car, and then go work, and then drop it back off at his house, so he didn't have to drive back and forth to work. We got more cars later on. We got more cars and a bigger budget, but that's kind of But this was kind of a deal that I worked on, got to know those sergeants, and then they had a need for some extra people because we had the Republican National Convention came to town. Well, people in the intelligence unit were demonstrators and any groups that would advocate civil disorder. Well, so in 1976, we had all these different groups coming in. It was kind of right on the heels of the SDS and a lot of the bombings out of the late 60s and early 70s. And so some of them were still around. And they needed to gather intelligence on them. So I got to go down there and work with actually ended up working with a Secret Service agent most of the time and driving around the convention, where the convention was. And our job was to do protective intelligence. If somebody stumbled across somebody that just wasn't quite right, but they didn't really have anything particularly, they'd call us and we'd go over and take them aside and talk to them and check them out and find out what the deal was, or maybe take them to a room that we had set aside just for those kinds of interviews. So, and after that, they had an opening, and my good friend I grew up with was already down there, and he was putting in a good word for me. And I went down there, and it made all the difference in the world. It was, I tell you, I never had so much fun for 13 years in my entire life as working in the intelligence unit.
How long were you a police officer before this all happened?
About 4 years. I think 2 years in patrol and 2 years as a burglary detective, and then I went into intelligence unit about that.
And this was the early 70s, right?
Right. It was 1976, actually. I came on in 71, so it was actually 5 years total in patrol and detective unit where I went in there.
So when did you start like first hearing about organized crime?
You know, I didn't know anything much about organized crime before I went down there. I knew, I had read about Balachi. I'd read the book. There was a book, Joe Balachi, so I knew that much about it. I didn't know anything about Kansas City organized crime, other than supposedly we had mobsters here in Kansas City. I don't know. I was too busy running around trying to catch armed robbers when I was in patrol, or burglars in the process, or make cases on burglars, and I didn't really study it out. It's kind of interesting. I think back, like, well, I should have thought more about that, paid more attention, but I didn't.
The government trying to say that it didn't exist too?
Well, that was, we have to go on back when we talk about Nick Sabella, particularly, why they had started admitting that the FBI had started admitting that there was a mafia after 1957, after the upstate New York Appalachian Convention got busted with these mobsters from all over the United States, and Nick Sabella and an older guy from the Prohibition days, Joe Falardo, was caught. There's Nick and there's Nick's car, and they tried to shoot him up. He got in trouble here in Kansas City.
Oh man. So what happened there in that little
well, he was Nick in 1946. This is a little later on, but in 1946, he and a guy named Bugsy Anch and a couple other young guys were robbing gambling games. A lot of young mobsters, they go out and organized crime guys that rob other people who aren't protected. And today they rob drug dealers. Back then they were robbing gambling games. Gamblers that maybe somebody have a high stakes game in the back of their business or someplace like that. They scout those things out and they rob those games because they figure nobody's going to go to the police on them anyhow. Out of that. So they're robbing games. Well, they robbed a couple of protected games, and I don't know if they did it intentionally. Some say that he did it intentionally because he didn't care. He kind of was giving a FU to the ruling faction at the time.
But was he a made man at the time?
I doubt it. He probably wouldn't have done that. He would not have done that. He probably wasn't really made until he came back from Chicago, because what happened is they killed Bugsy Anch. Found his body, and Nick knew that he was in a world of shit then. He was sitting at a liquor store in that old black Chevy, I think it's a Chevrolet, sitting in a liquor store, and for some reason he was meeting a local deputy sheriff named, I think it was Joe Cuccia. And for some reason, Nick had slid over and was in the passenger side, and this deputy was sitting there in the driver's seat. He wasn't driving him. He had just met him there, is my understanding. And for some reason, Nick had slid over, and that guy got in the driver's seat. And somebody, put him on the spot, as they used to say, dropped a dime on him, whatever. They saw him sitting down there, saw his car down there, and they just pulled up and started blasting away. And they killed the deputy, and Nick rolled out that right side, and that was the last they saw him. And he ran to Chicago at the time, and hid out up there, and kind of was taken in by, they say Cherry Nose Gioia. I'm not sure exactly who it was, but somebody took him in and protected him while he was up there in Chicago for about the next, I want to say 3 or 4 years, somewhere along that, for the next 3 years at least. He must have done something for him up there in Chicago. He had a relative or two up there, so that's probably, probably how he was able to get protected in Chicago. So he hung out up there.
I'm surprised the cops didn't try to arrest him for the murder of the police officer. Right?
I think maybe this is 1946 Kansas City. I think maybe they didn't want to really investigate anything about that police officer. Actually, it was a deputy sheriff, which is a totally different deal. Like many big counties, the city police are the police. The county sheriffs are jailers and kind of the police, serve papers and do all that. And that's about all Jackson County. Other than way out in the eastern part of the county, they did a little bit of police work, had some road patrols out there. But mainly they were just political jobs, political stooges, really, and did stuff that the politicians wanted, is what the deputies did back then, especially. But nobody really wanted to get into that deputy getting killed and what he was doing there, I don't think. So nobody pushed that. And plus, they didn't do that kind of shit back then. They wouldn't try to, they didn't push every law to the very extent of everything that they could do back in those days like we do today.
Yeah, there was a lot of letting things slide, right?
A lot of letting things slide, especially when it's a mafia political kind of a deal going on like that. They didn't really want to get into it.
So was it a lot of people from Chicago that would be in Kansas City?
You know, they had a lot of connections. As far as, you know, us seeing them down here, no, we didn't really see them down here, but there's a lot of connections between the two over the phone, and they may do some kind of business together. You know, probably the most well-reported interaction was during the scam, of course, but before that, during this time, for example, during the war, during World War II, there was a guy named Paul Waiter-Rica and Joe Campagna and Cherry Nose Gioia. I think those were the three. They were reasonably high-ranking people. They were Cardo didn't go. Cardo was around, but of course he never did any time hardly. But these three guys got caught up in a deal where they were extorting money from Hollywood film companies out in Los Angeles, and they made a case on them, and they all got pretty. I think they got like, I want to say like 10 years in the penitentiary. We're all down in Leavenworth, and they would send people would come down from
Paul Rica.
That's Paul Rica. It is Paul Rica, isn't it?
Yeah.
People would come down to visit them, and they would always be met by somebody in Kansas City who would at the train station here in Kansas City, and they would drive them up to Leavenworth. And I read one thing where it was always Tony Gizzo's car, who Tony Gizzo was the boss kind of just before Nick Savella.
What's good, everybody? Welcome to Chatting with Staxx. I appreciate everyone that takes the time to come on my show and everyone that watches my show. I got a lot of content that I'm going to be dropping. I've been working really hard, and just be patient. It's coming. And things are great. Hope you guys are all having a great day. It's beautiful outside. Go enjoy the weather. And I'm going to be dropping a bunch of content. The next one I'm going to be dropping is part 2 of Robert Rosso. Shout out to Robert Rosso. Hope he gets his stuff together. And shout out to Blackout. What's up? Shout out to Blackout TV. Cindy, how are you? Mob Rat Hunter. Redzilla 2. What's up, bro? Teresa Murphy, how are you? So I will be back on later, and I'm going to be with a friend. I'm bringing someone on, so I will be back. Have a great day, everyone.